Section 25 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. John Inglesant, A Romance, by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 16. The next morning, when the brothers awoke and spoke to each other of the events of the night, Eustace did not seem to have been much impressed by them. He ridiculed the astrologer, and made light of the visions in the crystal. He, however, acknowledged to his brother that it might be better to avoid the inn parlour at Minturn, and said they might reach Yulton by another route. "There is a road," he said, "after you leave Cerne Abbas, which turns off 5 or 6 miles before you come to Minturn. It is not much farther, but it is not so good a road and not much frequented. It will be quite good enough for us, however, and will not delay us above an hour. But I own I feel ashamed of taking it." John Inglesant, however, encouraged him to do so, and towards middle day they left London on the Windsor road. Inglesant noticed, as they started, that his brother's favourite servant was absent, and asked his brother where he was. He replied that he had sent him forward early in the morning to inform his wife of their coming. "I would not have let them know of your intentions," said Johnny. Eustace shrugged his shoulders with a peculiar gesture, saying in French, "It is not convenient for me to come into my family unannounced. I do not know what I might find going forward." Johnny thought that his brother had bought his fortune rather clear, but he said nothing more upon the subject. They slept that night at Windsor, and hoped to have reached Andover the next day, but their servants' horses and those with the mails were not equal to be so long a distance, and they slept at Basingstoke, not being able to get farther. The weather was pleasant for the season, and to Inglesant especially, and so long confined with stone walls, the journey was very agreeable. It reminded him of his ride up to London with the Jesuit long ago, when a boy, when everything was new and delightful to him, and the future open and promising. The way had then been enlivened, and every interest doubled by the conversation of his friend, who had known how to extract interests and amusement from the most trivial incidents. But it was not less made pleasant now by the society of his brother. A great change seemed to be coming over Eustace. He was affectionate and serious. He spoke much of past years, of their grandfather, and of the old life at Westcare, of his early court life before Johnny came to London, and of the day when he came down to Whittaker with his father and the Jesuit, and saw his brother again. He asked Johnny much about his own life, and listened attentively to all Inglesant thought proper to tell him of his religious inquiries. He asked about the Ferrars, and told Inglesant some of the things he had been said at court about him and them. A sense of danger, even though it made little impression upon him, seemed to have called forth kindly feelings which had been latent before, or perhaps some foreboding sense hung over him, and, by a gracious providence, fitted and tuned his mind for an approaching fate. Inglesant felt his heart drawn towards him with an intensity which he had never felt before. The whole world seemed for the time to be centred in this brother, and he looked forward to life associated with him. They slept at Andover, and the next day made a shorter journey to Salisbury, where they slept again. The stately cathedral was closed and melancholy looking, and knowing no one in the town, they passed the long evening alone in the inn. The next morning early they set out. They halted at Cerne Abbas about 1 o'clock, and dined. Eustace made some inquiries about the road he had mentioned to his brother, but seemed more and more unwilling to take it, and it required all Inglesant's persuasion to keep him to his promise. The people at the inn seemed surprised that anyone should think of taking it, and made out that the delay would be very great, and the chance of missing the way altogether not a little. At this, however, Eustace laughed, saying that he knew the country very well. Indeed, his desire to show the truth of this assertion rather assisted his brother's purpose, and they left Cerne Abbas with the intention of taking the unusual route. The country was thickly wooded, many parts of the ancient forest remaining, and here and there rather hilly. In descending one of these hills, John Inglesant's horse cast a shoe just as they reached the point where the two roads diverged, the right hand one of which they were to take. As it was impossible for them to proceed with the horse as it was, Johnny proposed sending it back with one of the servants to Cerne Abbas, and taking the man's horse instead, who could easily follow them. As they were about to put in practice the scheme, however, one of the men said there was a forge about a mile beyond, and the road before them, where it would be easy to get the shoe put on. Eustace immediately approved of this plan, and Johnny was obliged, at last reluctantly, to yield. It seemed to him as though the impending fate came nearer and nearer at every step. The man proved himself to be an uncertain guide as to distance, and it was fully 2 miles before they reached the forge. When they reached it, they found that a gentleman's coach, large and unwieldy, had broken some portion of its complicated machinery, and was taxing all the efforts of the smith and his assistants to repair it. The gentleman dismounted and accosted the two ladies who had alighted from the coach, and whom Eustace remembered to have met before at Dorchester. The coach was soon mended, and the ladies drove off. But by this time Eustace had grown impatient, and, saying carelessly to his brother, "You will follow immediately," he mounted and turned his horse's head still along the main road, his men mounting also. "You are not going on that way," said Johnny. "You said we should turn back to the other road." "Oh, we cannot turn back now," said his brother. "We have come farther than I expected. We will not stop at Minturn," he added significantly. And so saying, he rode away after the carriage, followed by his men. Inglesant looked after him anxiously, a heavy foreboding filling his mind. He saw his brother mount the little hill before the forge, between the bare branches of the trees on either side of the road. Then a slight turn of the way concealed him, but for a moment or two more he could see glimpses of the figures as the leaves, boughs, permitted them. When he could see even these no longer, he went back into the forge. It was some 10 minutes before the horse was ready, and then Inglesant himself mounted, and rode off quickly after his brother. He had felt all the day, and during the one preceding it, a weariness and dullness of sense, the result, no doubt, of fatigue acting upon his only partially recovered health, and on a frame shattered by what he had gone through. As he rode on, his brain became more and more confused, so that for some moments together he was almost unconscious, and only by an effort regained his sense of passing events. The woods seemed to pass by him as in a dream, the thick winter air to hang about him like the heavy drapery of a pall. Whether he was sleeping or waking he could scarcely tell. What added to his distress was an abiding sense of crisis and danger to his brother, which required him, at that moment, above all others, to exert a strength and a persistence of which he felt himself becoming more and more incapable. He was continually making violent efforts to retain his recollection of what was passing and of what it behoved him to do, efforts which each time became more and more painful, and of the futility of which he became more and more despairingly conscious. Words cannot describe the torture of such a condition as this. At last he overtook some of his brother's servants with the led horses, whom he scarcely recognized, so far were his senses obscured. Their master was ridden on before with 2 servants, they told him. He would have to ride hard to overtake them. He seemed eager, they said, to be at home. Inglesant could scarcely sit his horse, much less exert to overtake his brother, who was well mounted, and an impetuous rider. Nevertheless, he gave his horse the spur, and the animal, also a good roadster, soon left the servants far behind. The confusion of mind which he suffered increased more and more as he rode along, and the events of his past life came up before his eyes as clearly and palpably as the objects through which he was riding. so that he could not distinguish the real from the imaginary, the present from the past, which added extremely to his distress. He stood again amid the confusion and carnage of Naseby Field. Once more he saw the throng of heads, and heard that terrible cry that had welcomed him to the scaffold. Again he looked into the fatal crystal, and strange visions and ghostly shapes of death and corruption came out from it, and walked to and fro along the hedgerows and across the road before him, making terrible the familiar English fields. A tolling of the passing bell rang continuously in his ear, and horses' footfalls sounded strange and funeral to his deceased sense. He knew nothing of the road, nor of what happened as he rode along, nor what people he passed, but he missed the direct turning, and reached Minturn at last by another lane, which led him some distance round. The servants, with the led horses, were there before him, standing before the inn door, and other strange servants in his brother's liveries, and several horses stood about. The old manor that was now an inn stood close to the church, at the opening of the village, with a little green before it and a wall, in the centre of which was a pair of gates flanked with pillars. The iron gates were closed, but the wall had been thrown down for some yards on either side, thus giving ample access to the house within. It was a handsome house, with a large high window over the porch, in the upper panes of which Inglesant could see coats of arms. Amid the tracery of the iron gates, running greyhounds were interlaced. John Inglesant saw all this as in a dream, and he saw besides creatures that were not real, walking among the living men, haggard figures in long robes, and others beneath the grave shrouds, ghostly phantoms of his disordered brain. He made a desperate effort for the 100th time to clear his sense of these terrible distracting sights, of his death of the brain that disabled all his faculties, and for the 100th time in vain. It appeared to him, whether it was a vision or a reality, he did not know, that one of his brother's servants came to his horse's side, and told him something of a gentleman of his lady's, a foreign physician, having met his master purposely, and that they were with it together. Inglesant dismounted mechanically, and entered the hotel, telling the servant to come with him. He had some dim feeling of dragging his brother away from a great danger, and a desire of gathering about him, if he could but distinguish them, such as would assist him and were of human flesh and blood. Inside the porch, and in the narrow hall beyond, the place swarmed with these distracting visions, walking to and fro. The staircase at the farther end was crowded with them going up and down. He saw, as he thought, his brother, attended by a dark, handsome man, in the gown of a physician, come down the stairs to meet him. But when they came nearer, they dissolved themselves and vanished into air. The host came to meet him, saying that his brother and the foreign gentleman was upstairs in the parlor. He had thought they were having some words a while ago, but they were quiet now. The whole house, Inglesant thought, was deadly quiet, though seemingly to him so full of life. To what terrible deed were all these strange witnesses and assistants summoned? He told the host to follow him as he told the man before, and he did so, supposing he meant to order something. They went up the 2 flights of oak stairs, and entered the room over the hall and porch. It was a large and narrow room, and was seemingly empty. Opposite them, in the high window, and on the great carved chimney to the right, running greyhounds cursed each other, as it seemed to Inglesant, round the room. A long table hid the hearth as they came in. With a fatal certainty, as if mechanically, Inglesant walked round it towards the fire, the others with him. There they stopped, sudden and still. On the white hearthstone, his hair and clothes steeped in blood, lay Eustace Inglesant, the Italian stiletto in his heart. End of section 25. Read by Elijah Fisher.